So anyway, I'm Jeremy Utley. It's a pleasure to be with you. If you are one of those kind of people that like to fast forward, so to speak, through a presentation, you can go to this link that I put at the bottom of the slide right now. You can download the presentation and look at it yourself, or go forwards or backwards to your heart's delight. I apologize for the bit of a mouthful at the end of the URL. I didn't have time to figure out how to use a shortener, but I'll do that next time. But I'm Jeremy Utley. As Jill mentioned, I am an adjunct professor at Stanford University. For the last 11 years, I've been running executive education programs that are really focused on unleashing innovation potential of professionals and of organizations. If you think about my world at Stanford just for a second, I wanted to give you kind of a sneak peek of my experience, or our experience, speaking for myself and my colleague, Barry Claybon. We cover both the topics of idea generation and idea incubation. So these are two critical capabilities to launching innovations: coming up with new ideas and then incubating them to determine whether they're worth investing in. In coming up with ideas, we've run for the last 11 years a course called D-Leadership, or Leading Disruptive Innovation, which partners with organizations like AZI, like Google, like the Opera, like LinkedIn, like General Motors. And we send spectacular graduate students into those organizations to lead disruptive innovation projects. In the context of incubation, we run a class called LaunchPad, which is a new venture accelerator that helps folks launch new businesses. And we've been doing that for 11 years as well, over 120 businesses, the majority of which still exist to this day and are raising quite a bit of money. That's on the grad student side. On the professional side, we also run programs around ideation and incubation for professionals as well. So we cover a lot of ground, but what makes us unique is it's not really theoretical. We like to practice applied innovation. And so instead of, you think about, exercise, there are great coaches who will give you kind of the perfect theory. Think of John Madden doing a chalk talk breakdown of a play in NFL. What we like to joke is we're actually more like Hans and Franz. We're here to pump you up. We want to get down to business, actually give you tools that you can practice and leverage in your work. And so we like to have a little fun too. So if you don't enjoy SNL references, feel free to sign off, get your lunch period back, no hard feelings. But by the end of the day, if we think about this idea of empathy, I love what we heard about the HHC mission a moment ago. And what I want to do is I want to equip you so that in any one of your HHC interactions, you have 3 very simple and powerful statements that you can leverage to facilitate a rich and empathetic conversation with patients, with partners in the organization, with stakeholders, et cetera. So that's a little bit of a breadcrumbing. That's what I hope to be able to equip you with by the end. I want to talk about the topic of innovation for a moment, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to deliver value in the world. And where does innovation sit? Everybody has a Venn diagram where they're in the middle. This is ours. Hopefully you have a Venn diagram where you're in the middle too. It's a great feeling. But the point is, innovation sits at the intersection of a desirable offering that is profitable for the business to deliver, and it's technologically possible. And there are some things that are possible that aren't viable or aren't desirable, et cetera, et cetera. And so innovation really lives in the sweet spot. And if you want to assess an innovation, what you need to do, these various lenses represent 3 different kinds of questions you could ask, right? Can we make this thing is the feasibility question. Can we make money making this thing is the viability question. And then, do people want it? And what we've observed when most organizations are focused on innovation, they focus on building. They want to make a thing. That tends to be their starting point. So, for example, the biodesign program at Stanford is a world-renowned program that has launched many very, very profitable ventures. And we've interacted with them many times over the last 12 years. They've been bringing us in recently because they've noticed something in their founders and their teams, and we noticed it too. This is a simple snapshot of a bunch of their projects. But if you think about that, I sat in on a class session the other day and just took snapshots. And the nature of the projects is necessary to understand to appreciate this point. If you look at this Venn diagram, which question do people think they need to answer first? You can look at what they're making and learn a lot. The question that all of these prototypes are answering is, can we make this thing? We have this idea for enabling deaf people to hear different sounds. Is that possible? And there's a lot of emphasis on feasibility. What we find interesting is that not only in the medical space, but in technology and in many other spaces, focusing on feasibility first is a recipe for disaster. There's a great quote by Andy Grove, who's the legendary founder or legendary CEO of Intel. And one of their massive misses was a product called ProShare. And I love the end of that quote. What Grove basically says is, we assumed that just because it could be done technically, there would be high demand. And it's just that we were wrong. And it cost Grove $750 million to learn that lesson. So if the top question we would argue is not the question to answer, which one should you focus your early innovation efforts on? It's actually more important to understand desirability. Do people want it? And understanding human emotion is critical, absolutely critical to delivering desirable innovation. And that's where the tools and mindset of empathy are profoundly valuable. To understand, to make a connection with another human being is that it can provide the seeds of a revolutionary new innovation. But that being said, we are cognitively inhibited from establishing those meaningful connections. And lest that just be kind of a theory, I want to give you a quick experience of that yourself. So we're going to do a simple exercise together. You're about to go into a breakout room in just a moment with one other person. And what I want you to do, I'm only going to give you 2 minutes in that breakout room, but what I want you to do is I want each of you to share a very brief story, okay? Here is the question or the prompt for you to consider before you go into this breakout room. What's something that's happened in your life in the last 48 hours that you appreciated? Very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to launch you into breakout rooms, and you're going to take 2 minutes. I'm not going to give you a time warning, so somebody set your stopwatch, but you got 2 minutes to answer this question. What's something that's happened in your life in the last 48 hours that you appreciate? Feel free to share details. You don't have to say, my kid gave me a glass of milk. What about you? Feel free to tell the story, that's fine, but think about it being a minute-long story, not a 10-minute-long story. We have one more part of this activity. So this is the prompt that you just had, right? Think of something that's happened in the last 48 hours of your life that you appreciate. Now we're gonna send you into a breakout room with a new partner, but you're not showing up as yourself, okay? I want you to imagine you're the person with whom you just spoke. And the prompt now is to tell the story you just heard as if it was your own in the first person, okay? So don't tell your own story. I want you to become, and if I talk to Genevieve, now I'm Genevieve. And I'm gonna tell, you know what, I've got a house and I've got 2 kids and I was trying to move into my house. None of that's true about me, right? But I'm gonna become Genevieve in this next conversation, okay? So I want everyone to think about the person you were just speaking with and think about embodying their persona. You know, do they move differently when they talk? Are they very serious and monotonous? You know, try to impersonate your first partner as much as you possibly can, okay? And by the way, your new partner doesn't need to know who it is or something, so you can preserve anonymity if you want. Have some fun with it, but your goal is to tell the story you just heard as if it was your story, okay? So we're gonna have Jody launch breakout rooms again, and you'll get a chance to tell the story you just heard, and we'll give you another 3 minutes to do that. Please accept the new invitation that's popping up on your screen now.
Thanks.
David, you mentioned you learned you need to listen more. Would you mind to say more about that?
Yeah, kind of the age-old story that you go into the breakout and it's like, oh, I have to think about what I'm going to say, and it's kind of me. What am I going to say? And then once I'm done, what do we say next to fill up the gap in time and that kind of stuff? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm supposed to be listening to this person, and right. Which I think I did okay with it. Don't get me wrong, but
no, we're not getting you wrong, David. This is the experience. So, having conducted this exercise hundreds of times across 30 plus countries, thousands of executives, exactly 50% of people have a really hard time with the exercise. And no, ladies, it's not the men. That's a good guess. That's what everybody says. It's not men and women. It's very simple. And David got right at it. It's who goes second. almost always in the first round, the person who goes second, the whole time their partner is talking, you know what they're thinking? Do I really appreciate that? Was that interesting to me? Is this story going to make me look good? You know, and then it gets to be their turn and they go, oh, it's my turn, and they speak. And that's fine as long as they think their job is to speak, right? But now when you go into the second room and you discover your job was actually to listen, you realize, wow, I thought I was supposed to be talking. And that is kind of the heart of the challenge. When I said that we're cognitively challenged to establish this empathetic connection, we think in terms of gaining empathy, we think about what are we going to say? What are we trying to say? And we don't think, what do I need to be hearing? How should I be listening? And that is a fundamental challenge, because if understanding human emotion is critical to delivering innovation, we have to acknowledge the fact that if we think our job is to have the right question or to know what to say next, we're likely to run into problems. And so that's the first important cognitive bias to realize. We think we need to be talking. And if we can overcome that and recognize it's what I have to say, even the questions I have to ask are actually way less important than being available to hear and receive what this patient in an HHC conversation is saying, what my business partner in a meeting is saying. If I actually take the pressure off myself to have something smart to say or interesting to say, and allow myself, give myself the presence of mind to hear and listen and be available, that's the first step to being empathetic, truly. But why is this empathy so important? There's two big reasons growing a sense of empathy is important to driving innovation. The first reason is you, and the second reason is them. And it might seem a little backwards, but I actually want to start with why you are a really important piece of the empathy puzzle. And I'm going to do it by telling a pretty famous medical story. This is my friend Doug Dietz. He's the head of design at GE Healthcare, and he makes machines like this. You may have seen them. You may be familiar with them. Many of us have had a CAT scan. It's a terribly, scary and painful experience, and you got to stay still. Imagine what it's like to take a CAT scan or as an MRI or an fMRI as a child. It's incredibly frightening. And Doug undertook a design-driven approach, an empathy-led approach to reinvent this machine for children. He ended up coming up with something that he calls the Adventure Series. And it's basically a simple set of interactions that leverages a child's imagination to transform an exam room from an intimidating clinical experience to an adventure that invites them to reimagine what's happening. And the impact of the Adventure Series has been remarkable. Sedation rates are down by an order of magnitude, down 80-something%. Employee satisfaction in these wards is through the roof. Customer satisfaction is up over 90%. On and on and on. Amazing innovation. But what I wanted to say is, when I say why empathy matters to you, what Doug has told me and what he's told many of our students at Stanford is, when he undertook this project of trying to reinvent the MRI machine, it wasn't an important project to his superiors, to his bosses. They didn't really see the value of it. There aren't that many pediatric scans that get taken every year. Never mind the fact now, by the way, it's generated a ton of publicity and revenue and all sorts of new contracts for them. But from the outset, it seemed kind of frivolous. It's a small market. Pediatric scans aren't that big. And Doug said he had to endure a lot of bloody noses and black eyes. And if he didn't have the connection that he had with the child who had inspired this vein of pursuit, he would have given up the hunt, so to speak. He would not have had the passion to endure the organizational friction that he had to endure to ultimately launch an amazing revolutionary product. So that's why empathy is important to you. Organizations hate new ideas. That's a very provocative statement, but I believe it. Organizations love reducing risk. They love reducing variation. They love reducing uncertainty. And what is a new idea? It's uncertain. It's variable. It's risky. And so a reasonable organization attacks a new idea like a foreign object, like a white blood cell attacking a foreign object, right? And if you don't have a sense of passion for the user whose life you're trying to impact, as an innovator, you're going to give up the hunt. You're going to say, never mind. So it's really important for you in order to have the sense of resolve and purpose that you need to deliver a meaningful product. But it's also important to them. And the reason it's important to them, being the customer, is a little bit unexpected. Very few customers are walking around thinking about your business. You know what I think I can improve is somebody else's, they're thinking about themselves. And where businesses stumble a lot of times when launching new innovations is or when undertaking new exploratory endeavors, they frame the challenge in terms of their organizational need. They frame the challenge in terms of their own language. And no user or end customer is compelled by a solution to an organization's problem. They aren't compelled by that. They are compelled by a solution to their problem. So I want to tell a quick story that's really, really cool. A story that cuts across both our ideation, and I would ask you, if you want to make the slides bigger for a moment, now is a great time to do it because you're going to want to see some of this stuff. If you're in Zoom, just for the moment, you can make my head a little bit smaller, but make the slides bigger because it's pretty cool. This story it actually started in our D leadership class with students, but it started transforming the organization, Delta Dental. Delta Dental is the largest dental insurer in the United States. And in 2018, they came to our class with this challenge. We've got a public health crisis on our hands. 70 million Americans don't have dental insurance. They're a nonprofit, they're a purpose-driven organization, and this to them was a major problem. And it's worthy of a class like Leading Disruptive Innovation to say, how do we solve this public health crisis? What's interesting, as the students started working on the challenge, you see here their team board is basically no people who are uninsured are walking around thinking about a public health crisis. And even though that seems like very compelling language to Delta Dental, and this is our rallying cry, when they go to the market with, get dental insurance because it's a public health crisis that you don't have it, we shouldn't be surprised if people are like, so what, So they had to discover what's the problem from the user's perspective. What do they want? And one of the things they discovered is, especially young people, many of whom don't have dental insurance, they don't care about the dental health. But you know what they do care about? Their smile, how they look. And the team realized, you know what? If we want to be addressing the public health crisis, we actually need to come in through the side door of vanity. And so they launched a quick campaign where they basically had the idea, like a blow dry bar where folks can go and get their hair done. They basically had the idea of a blow dry bar for your mouth. They called it Dazzle Bar, but it's basically a blow dry service, but for your mouth. And it's primarily a whitening service as far as customers are concerned, but they also clean your teeth, thus accomplishing their public health goal, all without changing the level of insurance. It's a retail offering. And they actually, importantly, they propped it up in a couple of urban areas and said, let's give folks this experience. And they actually brought in dental hygienists. This is an insurance company, okay? Remember, they don't sell retail products, but they brought people in off the street who, as far as those consumers are concerned, this is a real business, right? There's price tags, they're swiping credit cards, et cetera. And they ended up launching this product called Dazzle Bar. And then it started getting so much traction, we ended up inviting them into the LaunchPad Accelerator. A couple of the executives from the company, from Delta Dental, ended up becoming students in the class, in the accelerator, and they launched an incredible product. But, and there's all sorts of, we could get into the nitty gritty. I love to think about cost of acquisition and lifetime value of a customer, et cetera. But the point is, it's a great example of why does empathy matter? One, it matters for me as the innovator that I'll care enough about the challenge to persist in the face of resistance in the context of a risk-averse organization. But two, it matters to the user because if I don't have empathy, I'm not going to frame an opportunity or a product in a way that's compelling to them. And Dazzle Bar is absolutely, ultimately addressing the public health crisis that Delta Dental was so compelled by. But as far as the human beings who are being serviced are concerned, they aren't patients resolving a public health crisis. They're people getting a great smile. And it's because the team had a really deep and profound sense of empathy for that user that they were able to make that reframe of the problem and deliver something that really mattered to the customer. So hopefully you can see why empathy matters. It matters to you, it matters to the customer, and why empathy is so hard, because we are fundamentally set up to think that it's our job to talk rather than our job to listen. So all that to say, what are three, if you buy this premise that it's actually our job to listen, the question is, how do I frame empathetic or high potential empathy rich conversations? And here are three simple phrases that I'd like to leave you with. You don't need them on a clipboard. You don't need a questionnaire. Can you tell me about the last time you insert your area of interest had to come in for your oncology appointment? Can you tell me about the last time you had to sit in the waiting room and wait for her? Can you tell me about the last time your prescription wasn't refilled on time? Can you tell me about the last time you couldn't sleep? On and on, right? Fill in the blank. But what's the point here? Specificity is a critical element of an empathetic conversation. And what people love to do is they love to speak in generalities. Usually when I go to the doctor, usually the pharmacist says this, right? And, you know, people are really bad at averaging. And average experiences are really less potent to you as an innovator, but they're also less useful to provoke new designs and fresh thinking. You don't want to learn about somebody's average experience. You want to learn about a specific experience. And words like last or best or worst are really, really powerful words. And then you want to orient around listening to them as they share the details of that experience. And then you want to follow up on something they said. And this is very important because a typical interview format, you've got a list of questions, right? And you might start with, tell me about the last time, da, da, da. But then what does question two say? It probably on your clipboard has nothing to do with whatever their answer to question one was, which is to say a robot could do it, right? What can a human being do that a robot can't do, at least right now? They can listen to the answer that's given and stay in a conversation with a human being about that. So rather than going to the next question, which as far as a human conversation is concerned, is like, you know, it's like, hey, tell me about the last time you know, for me, that you dropped your wife off at the hospital. Well, it was crazy. It was during COVID and she had a rupture and I had to sit in the parking lot. It was truly traumatic experience. And you look at your clipboard and you go, about how often do you exercise? I go, wait, what? I was just telling you about my wife in the hospital and that, right? And we don't realize it, but we do that. When we take this kind of formulaic approach, we're just jerking people around and you wonder, man, I just never established an emotional connection with them. Well, no kidding, it wasn't a conversation. It was a sterile, you know, which is useful for a hospital room, but it's not useful for an emotion-rich interaction. You don't want sterile, you want real. And so a good phrase is to say, you said this. You said you had to wait in the parking lot. Can you tell me more about that? You said rupture. Can you tell me more about that, right? It's just being a human being, but these are simple phrases to help you because for whatever reason, my observation of professionals in the context of a patient interaction or a customer interaction is we stop being human beings and we start acting like robots. Now, please tell me how many times you actually, how many hours of sleep do you get per night? It's like, why not have a robot do that? You know, they would actually do a better job, right? Okay, but you're doing what a robot can't do. The third thing, take an obvious sounding word that they use and ask them what it means. Some of the most amazing insights in conversations happen when you take what we call a beginner's mindset and assume you don't know what scary means. What does scary mean to you? You said that it was scary to sit in the parking lot. What does that mean to you? right? And in a lot of this is where we diverge slightly from ordinary human conversation, because in a human conversation, you want reciprocity, right? I say it was scary, you go, oh, I know. Let me tell you about the time I was scared, right? But if you're trying to understand me, instead of self-disclosure, which is normal in a conversation, what you want is you want deeper understanding. So instead of saying, oh, scared, man, let me tell you about me being scared, what you want to say is, you said you were scared. What does that mean there? Right? Again, it's an incredibly human way to approach it, but it's again a departure from maybe our typical training. And then the last thing, and this is a bonus, I realized I said 3 questions and I put a 4th one there. Always ask why. I've heard a statistic that a 4-year-old girl asks the most questions. I have 4 daughters, one of whom is 4 right now, and I can at least say that one asks 3x the number of questions than her sisters does. You want to channel your inner 4-year-old. You want to ask why a lot. Why? Why is that? Why? You said that. Why? And not in a badgering, belligerent way, but in a curious way. Your job is to listen, not to talk. And those 3 letters are about the shortest question you can possibly ask. And your goal is maximum learning and maximum input or output with minimal input. And why is probably the most minimal input you can imagine in a conversation. So anyway, we'll move now, I think, to Q&A. As I said at the beginning, I'll just flash this back up. If you want a link to these slides, I'm sure Jody and Jill have a copy too, but feel free, you can download them here directly yourself from DocSend. And I'd love to hear what's on your mind. What are you thinking about as you think about this challenge of creating empathy-rich interactions with customers? What does it look like for you? What are you wondering about? I'll go ahead and stop sharing my slides now so I can see the chat, but I'd be delighted to hear